This feels like an Agile thing.
Does it? Well,
A little bit.
who would you be?
I would be Matt Beam.
Oh, well, that's cool. I'm Mike Marchi, and we're the hosts of this mess.
Agile thing.
And we have two guests today. Gentlemen, would you care to introduce yourselves?
I am Nguyen. We win. Can't lose with a name like that. Agile coach.
Welcome, Wee.
Been in the industry for some, I don't know, am I coming close on? No, not quite 30 years yet. Still about 25, 26. And my friend here.
I'm Marcelo Lopez, and I am that guy. Sometime coaching towards agility. I've been in quote unquote the business for almost 40 years now. But working in an agile sphere for over 20. I'll say, even though back in the 90s we worked much of the way that we would call agile today, but we didn't call it that back then. We just called it work.
Yeah, none of this stuff is new. You can find these same concepts in papers going back to the 1950s in IBM, I believe. It's different labels. Anyway, there's an ongoing conversation that has been going on in the background. I understand that might be what we want to talk about today. Yeah, what's the crux of the question? Is it about are we still talking about what an Agile coach is?
In quite a literal term, yeah. The answer is yes. We are in a situation now where the conversation begs to be rehad.
Okay. Should we satisfy that?
So the question is begging, even as we speak.
Begging as we speak.
Begging us whether you like it or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So say more.
Say more. We please.
So to frame the problem, so this is kind of where let's be very clear about what the problem is, right? The problem is we have a few frameworks, a few things out there that have been prescribed is a little bit of a strong word, but they've been defined as a way of proclaims to be the better way of working. Yet, even if you, I think when you look at the current slate of layoffs in the last 2 years, that is not necessarily cost, but it has brought about a certain attention because, many people are out of work. The question of effectiveness and utility and value come up.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of navel gazing, consternation, so on and so forth, of the effectiveness of Agile. People are questioning it, right? And especially, I think the easy way to put it is that when belts get tightened, excess staff, surplus to requirements, as like they like to say in soccer, right? They get cut. And so then there's this questioning, and then even now noticing how many people who have those Agile related roles forget about whether they're a coach or not. Like just this morning, just paying attention to who's still suffering, who's still looking for a gig, right? And that in itself brings about a question of Agile's effectiveness and staying power, right? And what Marcelo and I are calling attention to, or Marcelo started it. I've always called attention to it myself in a way, my own way, but we're cohering around this particular hashtag, right? Because what we are presenting is that there's a sort of brokenness about what we're doing here. There are certain things that work. I would argue that a lot of the ways and times that Agile has been framed is And it's I think when you look at the development of history and the trajectory of history, it gets really interesting. So I would like to open up the time machine, Marcelo, on this one, right? And but when you look at where we are now, even if you question the method of various different surveys, and there's a couple BS ones that crop up this past week or 2 weeks, right? But like if you look at the state of Agile surveys, this thing of like 75% transformation failures. When you dig deeper, you look at the organizational change management field and how they can't tout anything either. When you look toward Lean Six Sigma, they too have failed. So it's not like Agile is the latest, like it's not the savior, right? It's the latest trend of different attempts to solve perennial problems, meaning wicked problems, how to deal with organizational issues, how to get product faster, how to run an effective business. That's where we're getting at now, right? I mean, originally the manifesto was written around the two-word software development, but quickly people realized that there was I think many of us agree that there's something different about this Agile thing, that it has more traction, legs, uh, effectiveness that the prior ones didn't. Right, and I think in some ways, for me over the years, I have considered that it was because, just as it was with Toyota Production System, we pay attention to the people a little bit more. Not as much. I would argue the original TPS paid a lot of attention to the employee, right? Because like it didn't lay anybody off.
It demanded that you pay attention to the employee.
That's right. That's right. And then when you look at what happened was Lean spinning off of that, and if you follow somebody like Bob Emiliani, that gets lost. It gets lost. And then there's, I think, being of Asian culture, people are forgetting the dynamic of how much Japanese culture and Japanese language play into the success of TPS. That is understated, I think. Right? Because I mean, if you look at it even today, like look at any recent World Cup, who's the best spectator that shows up in any arena? It's always the Japanese, because they clean up after they leave a place better than they came. They're the only ones that do that, as far as I know, right? So there's something special about the Japanese in that regard, I would argue. Not all are like that. So obviously, that's a generalization, but the masterpiece of leadership that TPS left is something to be heralded and hard to replicate. Well, I would argue that it can be replicated, and it has been.
Yeah, yeah,
with the right culture.
and people forget the environment in which TPSL itself emerged. I mean, yeah, we had Deming going over there and Schubert and stuff, talking to businesses, but this was post World War II, a time of great difficulty for the country. It was trying to rediscover itself, if you will, and out of those constraints, notice, out of constraints emerged the notions of how do we rediscover ourselves and reestablish ourselves, okay, out of all this adversity that we've encountered in our living. So TPS emerged from that environmental constraint. Okay, and they said, this is how we will overcome. This is how we will emerge from this.
That's right. And you don't have a company coming to one country and go from one country going to another and says, "Hey, we're going to show you our best practices because we're going to pay back a debt we owe you because you helped us reconstruct ourselves." People are overlooking that.
Yeah, and the funny part about that is I think it was the head of Matsushita or Panasonic at one time said I can't, something to the effect, I could be getting some of it wrong. I can't believe these people haven't figured this stuff out. If they keep ignoring it, we'll own them in 10 years
That's right.
or some number of that. Okay, this was back in the early 90s, and he was in fact referring to things like TPS, because I was like, how is it not obvious to the West that this stuff will work for them?
So there's a certain cultural battle that's a part of this whole thing, right? And let's pull it back to our topic about agility. So there's something different about agility that is kind of strikes back to the original teams of TPS that really kind of started shifting things. If you really go back, it's like, to me, it's TPS that, like, okay, now this is something markedly different, right? And culturally, right?
So are we saying that TPS, part of the reason TPS works so well is because it had to work for the people who originally did it?
Yeah, they had to find some way to overcome the adversity that their economic situation found them in.
Yeah, and that same urgency isn't when you try to apply the system in a culture where that doesn't have that same sense of urgency, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
And there's a certain collectivism that is needed. I mean, they got we bombed the hell out of them.
yeah,
Let's be frank. We bombed the hell out of them, right? And we helped them reconstruct, and they had to pull resources in a way, right? They had to find them.
yeah. TPS was Japan's part of Japan's reaction to finding themselves in that situation. Okay, now how does this have anything to do with what the heck we're talking about today? Well, I think it would go without saying. We can disagree if you want, but I think it would go without saying that the agile community finds themselves in a similar constraint. How many? It's like the safety measure in a factory. How many days since the last injury? Okay, how many days since the last agile is dead post?
Right.
0.
Okay, I mean seriously, I mean come on. So
Or go the opposite direction, right, Marcelo? Like,
yeah,
how many success stories can we truly tout? And this is a difficult thing because, like, in a way, no company wants to step out and say, "Hey, Agile changed how I operated," because you know why? Most of them are gonna. It calls attention to. I learned this when I was doing Agile finance, right? Tried to do Agile budgeting, and nobody wants to tell a success story because it brings scrutiny to them that they
yeah,
once didn't operate well.
yeah,
Brings a
Oh, they don't want to be the in the
Nobody
front.
wants to be the poster child because you had to have been broken before you got fixed.
Yeah.
Right.
that's
Yeah.
one. That's part of it. The other part of it, if for whatever reason you cease to be that poster child, you are the poster child for the failure. But the point to go that is it unless, and I'm not saying this to be mean, unless we've been living under a rock, okay, the agile community is in a similar environment. Okay, I'm not saying it's to the scale or to the emotionality of what Japan was dealing with after World War II, but it is a similar constraining situation that has to be recognized for what it is. Okay, openly discussed. Okay, open discussions lead to candor. Candor leads to confrontation, which leads to potential conflict, and that's where we run into the problem.
And that's what
Okay.
leads to revolution because it needs to be
And
revolutionized.
and that's what yeah, and that's where we run into the problem because for those watching us now, this podcast is in response to another podcast, which is in response to yet another podcast. which goes back to an original podcast, because you guys, you Mike and you Matt, can call yourselves somewhat the OGs in this sense, because you're really the first folks that I spoke to about this recorded.
Oh, so this is coming home to roost. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's your fault, Marky.
This is all our fault.
No,
all right.
it's
So
not.
before
it's not your
before we go
That
any
was a
further,
joke.
I do want to back up just a bit, because I don't know that everyone listening will follow the link between what Japan was going through and what the industry today is going through. So could you tie those tie those together just a little more?
Mass unemployment, emotional malaise within the people.
Okay.
Industrial level trauma.
Industrial level trauma. I like those words, and a matter of fact, so much that I may borrow them. I'm asking for a friend, of course. So
I have a question. This might be premature, but should an Agile coach be on the hook for delivery? And if so, what kind of delivery? Is it too early to ask that question?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. It's too early to ask the question.
You jumped right into the fire. So I will volley on that pickleball court with a question that was mentioned in one of those other podcasts that I referred to, but the question was and remains: what is the central value for an Agile coach now?
No, that's right. And again, go back to what I said just a moment ago. If you do not tie yourself to the bottom line in some way, in which case Marcelo and I have been referring to it as fiduciary or fiscal responsibility. If you do not tie yourself to the bottom line in some fashion, meaning you help deliver or improve something that somebody can champion the change you created, you're access to requirements. Therefore, whenever the luxuries dry up and belts tighten,
I'll share this with you. Right before this podcast, I was part of a coaching meetup that we have on Saturday mornings. I'm not going to pimp it out here, although those that are going to listen to this, because I told them I was coming, I hope they come and stay listening to your podcasts. Okay, there is a reason why I follow you guys. All right, and I want them to follow you as well. Okay. I want them consuming good content. All right. But in that meetup, for the past couple of weeks, we've been putting together a value stream mapping exercise. Okay. And one of the things that I've spoken to some other folks outside of the conversations we've had on LinkedIn is, has anybody taken the time to map out a value stream for what does an Agile coach do?
Can I make a stab in the dark?
Please.
Perhaps an Agile coach should be on the hook for measurable organizational change that can be demonstrated to drive increased throughput.
That's one possible. That's one possible thing. And I'll put it to you this way, okay? Do you think a coach is measured on the number of goals or the number of wins?
Got to be wins.
Got to be the W's.
Isn't that what matters?
Got to be.
That's what matters to the ownership.
Yeah.
Driving the thematic engagement of the customer.
The people who pay you, what do they care about?
Right. So wait. So let me insert here, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the point I think many people gloss over very, very quickly. And you can trace it back to his. I have a particular hypothesis where this fell off the wagon, right? So if I am responsible for delivering the dubs, right, and in a way you could say organizational change and those things I introduce as a change agent, I must nominate changes, and then hopefully I have to sell the change and they get adopted, and somehow the adoption of my changes translates into dubs. Yeah?
Measurable
dubs. Money, and most importantly, in terms of like cha-ching, right? We got to have more income or reduce costs of some form.
Reduce risks.
Right? I call it playing to win versus playing to not lose. Playing to win meaning I'm going to create acquisition. We're going to enlarge our customer base versus playing to not lose, meaning I'm playing defense.
Or one more thing. we're going to, or one more thing, we're going to survive.
We're gonna
because you can shrink, you can grow, or you can survive. Okay, and sometimes you need to help survival. It's a different agenda.
That's right.
Okay, when we teach Kanban, we talk about different agendas that your system of services might serve. Some of them are a survivability.
Right. So
Marcelo, would it be fair to say that most organizations are either growing or they're shrinking? It's like the steady state is very difficult. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. I would say they are. Okay, and when you say shrinking, I mean there's probably a wobble. Okay, there's probably a wobble to that.
interesting.
Okay, so it may look as though they're shrinking, but within a certain tolerance level that an organization has, they will tolerate shrinkage as survivability.
So minimum survivability, growth as the ideal, right?
But long term, that's super risky. I would just point that out, right?
It's not all business risk management.
So let me lob the first arrow here. Okay, so we have to get dubs. Okay, we have to survive. Ideally, we're profiting, right?
Yeah.
And to do that, I must help and support my organization, especially in the case where I want to grow. I have to, as a coach, I have to know how to help them identify new targets.
Mm-hmm.
What is the discipline of identifying new business opportunities and new targets today?
Yeah,
that's called product management for all intents and purposes.
Yes.
Yeah, because the product is the business. You know, you ask your senior leaders, "What's your product?" If they don't recognize it's the name on the door, you have a problem.
Right. So at minimum, the game is, because this is where GIGO, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If I have bad targets, I'm not going to get those dubs, right? Mm-hmm. I have to have good targets so that I identify my plays, we execute on plays, and we win, right?
You have to see what you're aiming at.
Now, what I'm getting is there's a blind spot there, right? That's one blind spot of many. How many Agile coaching job recs out there, certifications, require that you have some sort of expertise in product? And then you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, Marcelo, what are you talking about? The manifesto only talks about working and building software. And this is where you have to look at the time machine.
It was 20 years ago, though.
That was 20 years ago, though. So let's rewind back, right? I forget what's that Rocky and Bullwinkle short, with Mr. Peabody.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Peabody and Sherman.
Yeah. Sherman. So let's go back, Sherman, right?
Yes.
Go back to 2000. Look at or the 90s, as Marcelo says. We just got done. What happened at that point? There was no product management for all intents and purposes in the tech world. It existed in hey, I'm going to build, I'm Procter & Gamble, I'm going to, Don Norman and all these other appliances and things. Sure, that existed. Product management existed back then. But for all intents and purposes, if you go back and you look at what happened there, look at TPS. Did Toyota have product managers? No. What do they have? Bunch of engineers.
Yep.
Look at Saturn V. Read Jim Highsmith's book. What do they have? Bunch of engineers.
Yep. Look at the new product development game. What did they have? They didn't have a project manager in those teams.
How did they get to products?
Maybe they had a salesperson and a marketing person, but they didn't have a product person.
So what you're saying is at the time of the manifesto, the discipline of product management wasn't there or wasn't mature yet.
Because I came into the field in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my own requirements. I was in the startup world here in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
And back then is the running operating model was you had a dev manager, a bunch of engineers, you had business development, like somebody who was working with sales, but then working with account managers, who kind of were the so-called voice of the customer at the time.
Right, but
you ended up with products
those folks basically that were out there would talk to the customer. The customer would tell them things, half of which they'd forget clearly what the customer actually said, and then you'd have to redo it. I mean, if you go back and you listen to some of Craig Larman's earlier conversations, hey, back in the day, we had this idea of programmer analyst, and there were tons of those positions back in the 80s and 90s. You were there to not only develop the solution, but to also collaborate with the person who had the idea and analyze the idea with them to develop it. I mean, it's one of the basest experiments that's part of less.
So do we take this inherent embedded product management process and abstract it out from Agile?
No, it was no such thing. It was that was part of engineering.
Over the years, is that how we ended up here?
Yeah, I mean, because
part of it's part of it, because even if you look at some of the early XP sort of stuff, it talks about having the developers talk to the customers. I mean,
the person actually using the thing.
The whole idea of stories.
That's
the
right.
whole idea, the 3C thing. It was a card to have a conversation. Well, who? Between the person who has the idea and some other people, to be determined who those other people are. All those metaphors involved having the conversation with a product.
That's right.
Somebody.
Okay, so I was in the software industry, but then I was writing code. We had at the place I was, we had customers, and we got customer requests all the time, and did frequent updates to our product to meet those requests.
And who wrote the requirements?
The customer wrote a request, and we did have a marketing person or a salesperson who would try and decide what they thought the wins and the losses would be.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, if they were willing to pay for it, we were willing to do it.
Right?
Yeah, they would frequently come to us and say, we need X. And then the engineers would look at it and say, okay, can't do X, but we can do this instead.
That's right. So when I came into the field, when I was in the mid-90s, I was in grad school, right? And I had a concentration in software methodology, right? In 95, 96, 97, it was, waterfall was the rage, right? RUP had unified process hadn't turned into RUP yet, right? But at the same time, it was sort of like when we learned, to me, what I recognize as proto-agile was you just sat next to the customer, just like you're talking about, Mike. You bang something out, you show it to them, they say yes or no. You went back, did another round, did a bit again. They said yes. Okay, now on to the next thing. And they pay you. That's what the manifesto really is to me, right?
Yeah.
So there was sort of de facto product management, but the thing that strikes me as maybe missing there is any sort of sense of strategy. Like just because somebody will pay you to do something.
But back then we didn't. The field didn't understand that you needed to do product management because
you weren't there
all the solutions were already so poor, right? So anything you built was going to be better than the next person.
Yeah,
right?
And almost any innovation was seen as an innovation, as small as it was, because it was so nascent still at the time.
Okay? Any direction you went in was progress.
Yeah, any direction you went in is progress, honey.
The dubs were right there, sitting next to the customer. They said, okay, that's a dub.
So the dubs are further away today. The dubs are harder and further away today is what I think I maybe heard.
Well, so hold on. So again, let's not jump back to the future just yet. So what happened, right? So some people proclaim, hey, 1990 to 2010 was first epic. I completely fundamentally disagree. Why? Because you have to look at the dollar, and you have to look at costs, and you have to look at salaries. You have to look at the externalities of what was running around in the field at the time. What happened in 2000? We're in the thick of the first .com bubble.
Right.
Yeah.
I was literally waking up to at least one or two phone calls every morning, feeling like a star athlete because there was a recruiter chasing after me and they were cold calling. Holy crap. Right? Remember back in the day here in the Bay Area, like somebody on the peninsula was like offering like a leased BMW Z3 if you got hired as part of your offer. What the hell?
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Frothy.
And the salary started climbing. People couldn't get enough. Couldn't get enough. Right? Couldn't get enough engineers.
Right.
Right? And then what did they do? So this is my hypothesis, but you have to look at it in this lens, right? From this economics lens of the business owner. Business owners are like, I'm paying large six-figure salaries to these engineers. I don't. First of all, they're saying, hey, I don't like to talk to people. Can I just build stuff? That's the engineer's thing.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But they like shiny objects. The other side is the business owner is saying like, oh my God, I'm paying so much salary.
And I'll tell you what happened, okay? Because I was there and I started seeing the folks coming out of college into the workforce after I had been in there for a few years. Okay. I think these attitudes started to creep in how we changed education in our universities. Okay. As people could develop more things on their own at home, as the personal computers became more accessible to you for you to hide in and have your bookshelf with your reference materials behind you, where you could look up, how does that algorithm go again? Let me go pull that up out of a book. Okay. Where did I see that? Where did I see that code example for this thing to draw up a dialogue in this certain way? Oh, let me go look that up. And they started to look inward rather than external to interacting with people and looking for the solutions. They started to draw these own ideas on their own, and the habits started to get more ingrained into them of the lone programmer. Okay, which then to some degree is part of what led to XP coming out, because folks like Kent started to say, no, this ain't working here. I need people to talk to each other.
I agree from the technical perspective that was the path that took, but there's another side to this story.
I'm sure there is.
The other side of the story is going back to Wee's example, where we were suddenly pulling engineers out of the woodwork and we're collecting them. We've got this collection of engineers, and we've suddenly got this pool of people that is a high cost center that we've got no control over whatsoever. And they applied the only tool they knew at the time, which was traditional project management. They pulled something that was not fit for purpose, and they tried to apply it to a bunch of creatives and say, tell me how long it's going to take, tell me how much it's going to cost, tell me when you're going to be done, and follow that. Otherwise, you're of no
Wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
And then right, exactly, right. And
right.
And what was the phrase? I don't want my engineers doing all these things. I need them coding.
Yeah.
I can pay somebody less to do requirements gathering.
And I'll go you further. Management caught on to that, and then it cycled back into the education of management. And so that became ingrained into how MBAs were educated. They were educated to expect this, track busyness over business.
And that clearly didn't work. And that's, I think, also part of what brought extreme programming to the fore. Because when we were maximizing busyness, we were maximizing overtime. We were putting people in salaried positions so we could beat the hell out of them.
Yeah.
I was on the receiving end of many death marches.
Yeah. If you were to talk to some of the original Chrysler C3 folks and stuff like that, like Chet and Joseph Pellerine and obviously Ron Jeffries, they'd tell you some similar things. Yeah, because being busy did not mean being productive. They knew that 30 years ago. But we still haven't cycled back into getting that into the mindset of management yet. Okay. This is why when we were having the conversation beforehand, Mike, I said, this is a many to many problem. We haven't explored the many to many problem enough yet to start figuring out where's a good place to start at solutioning this thing.
Well, it's a complex problem, so we probably need a complex adaptive solution for it.
Correct. Which hopefully might be fed by a team, which honestly is what I've been hoping in all this. So that I'm not saying a team, but teams of teams Okay, I'm going to quote Bob Martin. How do you solve big, hairy problems that are complex? It's done by a network of small teams working on small parts of the problem, communicating sufficiently enough so that they're all coordinating their attack on different aspects of the problem enough that they can solve the problem together.
That's right.
I'm not going to say it's just my problem, but here's part of the problem.
With standard interfaces between them, so they're free to
With
go as
some
quickly as
sort of
possible.
working agreements between them for them to understand how to communicate their aspects of their problems sufficiently through this living network.
And to unblock them in terms of dependencies.
We have many people who do recognize this problem, or at least from their perspective, what they're seeing. The reason, and I'm just going to say it, hopefully blank out stream of consciousness. The reason for the hashtag is to get more of those folks out of the woodwork, recognizing this many-to-many problem. Any contributions that they can give to helping discover where the endpoints are so that we can start chunking it to start working on it and decomposing it and working on towards solving it is why the hashtag exists in the first place. The problem is it perhaps maybe to its detriment is somewhat incendiary. Well, I'm sorry, folks. The place is already on fire in many places. Can you not? I mean, I could go back in my pile of training stuff and bring out the dumpster fire toy. This is what we're facing.
So the hashtag, the thing about the hashtag is it's a very declarative statement. And when you guys are sitting here discussing what you mean by it, the words don't match. They don't. So all you're doing is you're collecting response to your very strong declarative.
Right.
Well, but all abstractions are kind of leaky. Maybe the purpose of the hashtag is to bring people in and then get specific.
I'll quote you something from a different podcast earlier this week. A certain well-known coach, who I will not name by name, went on a certain person's other podcast earlier this week that was published. It might have been, well, also not named. It was either recorded live and then published almost immediately, or a few weeks back. The podcast operator actually said, well, if everyone is an Agile coach then, and left it hanging off the cliff. How is that phrase any different than mine? It's perhaps less confrontational.
Sorry, can you just what is the hashtag again?
Which one? The one that I'm talking about, or the one that
we're discussing right
hashtag.
Now? No such thing as an Agile coach.
No such thing as an Agile coach.
Okay.
And when you hear that, Matt, so let's go with it. Matt, when you heard that, we talked about this last week, a bit ago. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that?
Confusion.
Yes.
Okay. That is not the first thing you said last time.
Okay. Well,
what did I say last time?
Question. When someone says, if everyone is an Agile coach, then what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Nobody's an Agile coach.
No one is an Agile coach. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hang on. I might have heard that somewhere.
Okay. So two things here. We've got this concept of Agile coaching. We've also been talking about this concept of industry and needs in the industry. I don't think we've married the two concepts yet. So you can dive into no such thing as an Agile coach.
So to kind of marry them, I want to be very clear about that. Kind of marry them.
Can you be kind of married? I don't know. That's
it's
okay,
common law.
sorry.
It's like a common law marriage.
Okay,
after
married.
7 years. That's
If
what
he
it
talks
is.
about it for 7 years or more, then they're married. So.
True. But then if you want to break it off, you have to pay a get.
It's really
and then
expensive.
You might have to have a patuba. So
make a decision in year 6. That's
there's
my
no such thing as a common law Agile.
So. Well, yeah, that's quite possible. Quite possible. So the thing is to kind of draw some sort of tie, not necessarily binding, but tie.
Sure.
All right, is the fact that the industry, and by industry now I'm going to not name names, but to talk a particular function. Human resources, not understanding what does an Agile coach do, okay, and it's management that backs it also having a lossy understanding of what does an agile coach do, okay, put together or have put together job requisitions or accepted into employment. There, I'll say it. Accepted into employment, okay? Folks into these positions where after the fact the business finds itself, hey, where's my value center again with hiring these folks?
Yeah, if you can get rid of a whole
what
category of people, Ellen, once it suggests that you never had a real strong value proposition for them in the first place.
We did not uphold the value proposition that was originally put forth, because having one, oh yeah, we do. If we go back to things like at UPSLA 2003, a panel of 6 well-known names, I'll name some of them: Yuta Eckstein, Joshua Karievsky, Mary Poppendick. I could keep going. Okay, specifically outlined, huh?
It's only 3 more. I mean,
It's only 3 more. Yes,
Halfway there.
Robert May, Rachel Reinitz, and Stephen Fraser. There,
okay, good.
I named them. Fantastic. So there's the names. Talked about what the hell is this agile coach thing? Okay, and I've chosen
2003. That was
2003. Yes, sir.
Okay.
October. I'll give you the dates. October 26th through the 30th, 2003. Okay, it's easily findable on the internet. All right.
Okay. So this is so in context historically, like we were saying, in 2001, when the manifesto was written, product management as a science did not truly exist, even though there were bits and pieces of it baked into the notions that we were doing.
Yeah, into the notions.
So,
I mean, companies
right, but now it's 2 years later. It's 2003.
Yeah.
At the time of this discussion, was it there yet?
It might have been also in a nascent state. Companies like IDEO had permeated, especially after the Nightline interview that they had and stuff. They came more into consciousness, and folks started to see them as a product development partner, if you will, and stuff like that. I mean, they had influences on, like, I think they had influences on the 2nd or 3rd generation of the Palm Pilot before they went boom. Okay, and by boom I mean exploded and went out in a crashing ball of flame. But in this time period, they had this conversation of what should I expect from this person who coaches Agile within a context of a team. Still, they were talking about teams, but they weren't speaking about necessarily the constituents of that team. They included developers, but they could have just as easily included business people. They were talking about helping people work in a team, help getting them going in the right direction,
helping the team, but not the organization.
That's right.
Huh? They definitely weren't talking about the organization at that point.
Well, because here's the thing. What's the difference? What's the difference between a team that has software developers and a team of managers? What's the difference, other than a few MBAs? What's the difference?
Different outcomes that they're on the hook for.
What's their product? What's their product? That's the difference. What's the product of the managers? What's the product of the software developers? What's their product? That's the difference. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I've always said that the product of a manager is
you could disagree. I'm totally cool. Okay. Unfortunately, I couldn't get Patrick Lencioni to join us today. He would explain that further. It's in his book, The Advantage. Okay. That's their product. Okay. But the point is, the point is, yes, I'm extrapolating a little bit from what Mary Poppendick said, but the point is still valid. It's extrapolatable. She was talking about working with a team who the coach knows practices that are working well, knows the plays around working well in a team, and helping get them organized, all right, and going in the right direction, helping guide them, sometimes even teaching them.
So, Marcelo, I want to call that. What do we call that? That's called a former player who has turned coach. Somebody who has work domain experience.
Somebody who's played the game.
The game. It doesn't matter whether they were a good player or not, but they know how to play the game. They've sat on the front line. They've gone through a release. They've burned the midnight oil in a death march once or twice or 10 times.
Sure.
And that's how they know to effectively coach
and they know what
the game.
they know what to avoid.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
if one were to try to specialize the concept of agile coaching, what you're describing now is a team coach. You're talking about the
It's a
person who
team.
works with
Well,
the team.
Not in the think sports, not what agile team coach is, right? So
Yeah.
I'm trying not to get lost in the definitional stuff too much, but there are different focuses, right?
player coach. Let's call it
Mhm.
player coach.
Okay,
Player
fine.
coach.
So a player coach. So let's say there's a player coach. They've done it. They've played the game. They know the domain. They're helping the team. And if one were to look at the definition of something like Scrum, that was kind of the Scrum Master, right? The intent was the Scrum Master knew the framework and they coached the team in functioning in that framework. And they were a coordinator and they were an organizer and a facilitator and they were all those things.
If the game is Scrum, that's true. I think
In the game of Scrum, true, but I think there was for me, I think there's a little bit of a slippery slope because I mean I'm recollecting some retelling and recounting over the years of people saying like Ken Schwaber, that was way of Ken Schwaber's way to shut up the product man, get them out of the way, right?
Well, and there was something to that, but in 2005, when I took my Scrum Master training from Jeff Sutherland, product was almost a footnote. There was a product owner. There was a product owner that worked with the team, and at the time, they were saying the team presented stuff at the end of a sprint to the product owner. It was like the product owner came in planning, threw stuff over the wall, and returned for sprint review.
So
they weren't part of the team until more like 2007. I think
they were someone outside the team, and you are well within your right to point out that the definition of Scrum early on did not recognize that the function of what's next needed to be inherently within the confines of operating in the team. Okay, you're well founded there. Okay, many of us, well, people may not know this. I'm a CST. Sorry, not advertising. But many of us who are trainers, okay, recognize, yes, that was insufficiently clarified as a necessity for a well-functioning team. Okay. Here's one quote from someone that I'm gonna use without naming them. A certain author of a certain book on agile coaching said, "Well, while professional coaching says you have to meet them where they are, an agile coach should be a half step ahead." My question back in response to that person, who I've actually posed that question to, is, how do you know to be a half step ahead if you don't know where you should be heading?
You don't know where to stand.
How do you know where? How do you be a half step ahead when you don't understand the domain of where you should be stepping and not stepping?
But wait a minute. When you say meet them where they are, do you mean them personally and how they're doing in their role, or do you mean where they are in terms of the quality of the organization and all
this? This is a tenet of professional coaching, Matt. I'm not making this up.
Okay. So wait. So let me can I interrupt here because I want to bring back the time machine here. Okay. So look at what happened at this period. We're in 2010. We're around that period. Teams that are succeeding, whether people are understanding what Agile is or not, it's gone somewhat viral amongst the management class. Okay. My peers going Agile, they're doing that. They're building all this stuff, and their staff seems to be happy. How can we do that at our organization? Whatever it is, let's go hire an Agile coach. Let's go hire a product. Well,
let's install this thing.
Let's go install this baby, right? And then wait a minute. Wait, what are you doing to me? No, wait, no.
I paid
only
you.
The part that I'm comfortable with, please. Like, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves and just look. It's an IT thing. Don't mess with me. Don't mess with my operations. Go do it. Go prove it in the engineering side first before you go anywhere else. For better or for worse, that's pretty much how everybody is. So that immediately you get launched into a bubble. For better or for worse. Okay. And at the time, so we're talking about this period somewhere between 2008, 2010, Lisa's book comes out. All these things happen, and probably somewhere between that and 2015 or something like that, right? And if you notice what happens is there's a craze, right? It's great. The engineers are super rare. Where we've gone well into the deep end with offshoring,
Look,
especially the large companies.
I'm going to make it visual because sometimes we have folks that are visual learners, and for hopefully the only time, I'm going to share my screen with your permission.
Go for it.
Okay.
Sure.
This is the Google Ngram on the word Agile coaching.
Right. So we've gone in the deep end.
Wow.
Tech's super expensive. We've got product managers. We've got Agile coaches. And if you look at this period, this is the beginning where like now the Agile gold rush starts.
Yep.
And there's not enough people. Now we can complain about their certification bodies all we like, but realize they were serving a need.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a market. Otherwise they wouldn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
What happened? There were not enough coaches around. We couldn't get enough player coaches.
Right.
We couldn't get enough scrum masters.
Mm-hmm.
We had to create them. The only way is to educate.
Yep.
Educate, commoditize,
Yep.
certify.
Okay. And herein lies part of the issue. Okay. That without taking into regard what sort of folks should we be creating? Okay. If we go back to things like what I have alluded to about the conversations that were had in 2003 and then in 2009 again at an XP conference and so on and so forth. What sort of folks are they? Okay. What sort of capabilities should these people have? Okay.
So you look at the most adjacent roles, right? So it's
Correct.
the former program managers, the former project managers. They go get the certification. Some are good, some are not so great.
And so here is the thing. Words, if we believe the phrase words matter, part of what took hold was a misunderstanding of the context of, for example, looking at Rachel Davies and Liz Sedley's book when they said that the progression was, okay, to end up or to at some point be like a life coach. Okay. And that's because they had an understanding, okay, that when somebody who read that book, they would have sufficient contextual knowledge to know what they meant by that. Okay. That the progression from a new team to a more mature team, which in my words, I describe it is that they are recognized to now be more self-experienced, self-motivating, empowered. In other words, they're able to, change things within their domain, their processes, their tactics. Okay. And that is that perhaps folks who did not recognize that embedded meaning took the words life coach way too literally and said, what kind of domain of skills fulfills that? Oh, professional coaching.
But before that, slow down a moment, Marcel. Like, let me reinforce that even, right? Because remember, the market was there were not enough coaches. There were not enough CSTs. There were not enough Scrum Masters. Go back even just 2 years ago, 3 years ago. You could, like the company I was working with, couldn't get a Scrum Master. Didn't care if you actually had the experience or not. We just needed a body, and we would coach their way into mastery.
But you could grow a Scrum Master in 2 days. All you had to do was send them to a CSM class and boom, you've got a Scrum Master.
Hold on. I will hold to task any trainer who purported that mindset, Mike. You can
whether the trainer purported the mindset or not, the industry implication was
you might say that, Marcelo, but that SAFe doesn't care.
Mm-hmm. I agree because they'll mint you a safe Scrum Master, which is seen as a more capable Scrum Master in the same 2 days.
So if you look at what the safe creators are doing, is like, look, I'm just serving a need. If you go and ask them, like, there's money here. If there wasn't a need, I would not be making money.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I totally get it. Okay. And speaking just
that
for
doesn't
myself,
work in a medical context.
Huh?
That doesn't work in a medical context.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
A lot of contexts where that would be considered unethical.
That's right. That's right. But even in the program, so notice that what I was going back to earlier, right? We didn't have enough player coaches because there were not enough to go around, period.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know, because they grew too fast, right? Two is hold on, Marcel. Let me finish, right? Two is that there's project managers, program managers who need to reinvent themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Plus an influx of people looking for good paying jobs that they can take managerial experience from other domains, adapt them into these roles and somehow get by.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that time, I would argue that probably also the problems were so egregious that, yeah, if you just focus on people problems, you probably deal with 80% of the issues out there. Right. So it was, in a way, this perfect storm is what I'm getting at. There's a big need. There's a lot of these certifications around willing to do it. There was a dearth of player coaches. Engineers didn't want to do the people things. You had you had professional coaching that was looking for a new avenue in to make more money, because in reality, what the dirty secret with professional coaching is, it's a tough gig. Why? Because you got to hustle yourself big time to be successful.
Right.
So they're looking for additional revenue streams, and they say, hey, I'm good with dealing with people. Let me give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So we mashed some stuff together, and what we forgot to make sure we included was the connection between the activities of the coach and organizational
economics
output.
of the coach, the understanding that the work domain cannot be left behind and must be central and fundamental to the function of the coach.
So it's almost like you're saying, I can come in and coach this rugby team. I'm really good at talking to athletes, but the part about whether we win or not, I'm not so clear on that. The part about how the plays work.
I want to add one more thing before you go there. It's like, remember, the other side is anytime we go into anything technical, it's ooh, yucky. Math, ooh, yucky. Programming, logic, ooh, yucky.
Who are those people?
All the non-player coaches.
All the non-player coaches.
Oh, okay. All right. So we haven't talked about non-player coaches yet. We've talked about player coaches, and the good or the value proposition of a player coach is that they know the game. They can work with the players. They can get the players upskilled and working efficiently as a team, and they deliver W's. Okay?
They have credibility to the team.
So that I don't think anyone would disagree with that concept, right? But that is still insufficient for organizational change. You can change all the teams you want. You can coach all the teams you want.
Perfect.
But
exactly.
there's something more that you
and
need
there's
to
something
do.
more with the player coaches.
Yes.
Because the player coaches know how they, like, if you like, I follow certain soccer, European soccer teams, right? The player coaches know how to run the team, but they don't know how to run the business.
Exactly.
Right? They're not the manager of the football club.
Yeah.
Right?
So the question here is, though, do you hire a general manager who doesn't know the sport?
Is that the question?
If they're really good at getting the people who can deliver on the other areas that they don't know,
how does
maybe?
that person know that the person that they're getting if they're not familiar with the sport?
Objective metrics.
What are those objective metrics?
Well, I'm just talking off the top of my head here. You could have metrics for how well the defense works and how well the offense works, so you know that you break it down to the components of what the subdomains of the organization needs, and then you marry that up to overall the reason the organization exists at all. Do those contribute to the organizational outcomes? You could tie it together logically.
You can say how well they react to their opponents.
Yeah, how many
well
goals
do they
do
react
block
to their opponents
per game? Yeah.
Okay.
And this is where the sports metaphor falls apart, right?
That's where sports metaphor falls apart, right? Matt. Thank you. Thank you.
Because now we're talking about, okay, I can. So we have like when you look at the prior calls that Marcelo had been in and out of, like, you can see the player coaches, and then there's those that define Agile to be more than player coaching, right? Because if you look at what happens is, like, let's say I'm a safe guy, okay, and some organization decides to hire me, and I know if I have any sense about me, I'm gonna go after the dubs, right? Whether it's related to safe or not. Okay, I'm gonna go into the organization, and then I'm gonna say, I got to figure out WTF I'm gonna do to get those dubs. Right?
Whether it fits into the installed framework or not.
That's
Looking
right.
at the
So
organizational
some of
level.
it is the framework. Some of it is like, oh, wait a minute, this leadership is screwed up, and we don't have a strategy.
Right.
Going
It'll
back to
never
what I
work.
said earlier, right? They realize the importance of, at least SAFE speaks about like lean agile portfolio, and it gives some sort of milk toasty, lip service to it.
Yeah.
Right. At least they were ashamed enough to put the customer on their map somewhere. Right.
So I don't mean to interrupt. We are coming up on the end of our time box. It's funny to me. I just want to say, in retrospect, like Scrum Master has always been described as something that you should. Wasn't it part of the Scrum Master role that they would go out and coach the organization?
Yes.
Wasn't that a thing that was said?
So it's kind of funny you mentioned that, Matt, because very much so in this meetup, I told them about the fact that I was coming on this podcast, and someone who's there who is or has been working as a coach at the enterprise level for many years at a very well-known financial institution, but has lived through this transition and survived it, made the interesting statement is how is a scrum master any different than an agile coach?
That's right. So now let's get straight to it, because we're at the end of the time box, right?
Yeah.
Let's put it really, what's going on is a bidirectional problem.
Mm-hmm.
One is the non-player coach needs to learn how to player coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then the player coaches need to know how to deal with the non-player coachy things, meaning acquire additional skills to sense into changing the organization so that you can deliver their dubs. Because in the end, if you look at it, what it is then this is what I've concluded, is a leadership problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a leadership.
Yep.
Because it takes leadership to freaking decide what strategy to build, but yet it's another form of leadership to player coach the team as well.
Yeah.
And your job as an agile coach is you're instilling some form of leadership. But you have to know how to play the game so that you can tell the players how to lead themselves. But then you have to know the other parts so that you can help the other side figure out how to lead the business side.
It's a both and.
It's a both and.
It's a both and. Hence why I said this is a many to many problem. Okay.
But has this conversation been clarifying, illuminating? Has this been
helpful?
Has this been worth it?
I feel for me it has. I hope you guys have a little bit more comfort level. I'm responding. I actually reached out. Full disclosure here, folks. I reached out to Mike because I was sensing some discomfort from the previous recording, and Mike's my friend. Known each other for a few years, and I said I want to help address this. I want to help clarify it. I want to help us understand each other better. Okay. Hopefully some other folks who I have privately invited into this conversation will see this as yet another invitation to have this conversation frankly. Okay. And when we get to the confrontational parts, which they're going to come, we can talk through it. Okay. Because there's a lot of good folks out there who are very capable, okay, who are, I hate to say it this way, sitting on the sidelines because they've gotten caught up in the wash, okay, of the crashing wave of we didn't have enough. Now we've got too many. Some are, not to be unkind, but are not capable to the need as we actually see it, okay, and yet we're not really sure how to refill the needs that we actually have. So they're responding in a different way and trying to mash roles again. Why? Because the tools that they have in management are not sufficiently, I'm not again being unkind, but are not sufficiently educated in what does an agile coach do to adequately help HR answer what does an agile coach do for me to go search for these people.
Well,
and then
you're
it's gonna butt heads with certain HR things too, because like
Correct.
HR is heavily tied with OCM, for instance.
Correct.
Right? So now go back to the hashtag. Hence the hashtag. The hashtag is exploring this many to many issue.
Mm-hmm.
That what you can realize is if you treat them as sets of skills. There's the player coach skills, there's the non-player coach skills, the tech skills, the non-tech skills. What we need is some form of consilience. That's why I use that word. We have to reconcile how these things fit together. But the other side is to realize that VUCA is ever sleeping, ever growing, ever living and expanding, and that we need an ever growing ecology of practices.
There's a dynamic tension between destruction and creation. It's inherent in the nature of being. And so when I hear no such thing as an agile coach, I guess what I'm saying, I'm a little bit confused, but I guess what you're doing is you're destroying the old concept so you can rebuild a better one, a more inclusive, evolving.
I think so.
You understand?
I think so. And I know that other folks in efforts that I've been to some degree involved in have tried to do that. Okay. My concern is it's trying to be too much to too many people. Okay. All right. And yet it leaves behind certain things. And yet
there
it
is a
leaves
reason
behind
for that,
things.
Marcelo. And we've touched on it as we went through the history, as we played back the history, right? We have established what the value of a player coach is. We know why you would need one and the value proposition of a player coach.
Mm-hmm.
And we just we looked over the rim of the problem and said, oh my God, there's a vast landscape of the organization beyond this. And I think that is a future conversation.
Sure.
The people playing the roles of agile coach in that vast landscape are not all player coaches. That doesn't mean they're not good coaches.
No, it doesn't mean there's value to what they do.
Exactly. They play on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're not. Okay, they've gone through programs to infuse and practice and apply a certain set of skills, and that's great. And any of the students that come to my classes, yes, I'm a Scrum trainer, I'm a Kanban trainer. I've never told a student to not take a class from a certain scale organization.
You don't have to do that.
I've never told them not to take a class. Learning is important. Learning is useful, but you also have to recognize that when you learn something, what the context of its applicability is.
You need discernment to use the right tool in the right situation.
You need that discernment. And here's my issue. That when I try to have this conversation with some folks who have invested a lot of time in learning a certain set of skills, okay, their non-desire for consilience is what causes that friction. I mean, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but if I'm going to be, if I need to be open, which I do, to understanding this other set of skills is valuable, is useful, is needed. We have to have it. Okay. Why is it so difficult for folks from a different point of view, a different frame of reference, to come the other distance and say, maybe Marcelo has a point. Maybe he has a point, and we need to be having an open conversation about it. What's so wrong about it?
We're pointing to a particular systemic blindness.
Correct. A paradigm-induced blindness. I'll put it that way. A paradigm-induced blindness.
Every talk that we've seen other people talk about this, they don't recognize their own blindness, is what we've been saying to ourselves.
And we're not trying to be judgmental about it.
Not.
But if I explain it a half a different ways now, this hashtag, which we're now into, even possibly the double digits, okay, and someone is still reticent to even be open to considering they might be missing out on something, at some point one has to ask yourself,
well, like moths to a flame, you have lit that hashtag lights a little tungsten flame in the corner, and this very bright light is attracting moths, and most of those moths are looking at that hashtag and going, the hell there isn't, right?
Well,
And so they come into the conversation in believing that you're trying to invalidate their existence.
interestingly enough that you say that, okay? Interesting enough you say that, because now other folks are starting to use that hashtag and are starting to post about it and discussing from their experience what their experience leads them to say, you know what? Maybe he's got something there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's why I say I refer to that as a sort of Semmelweis effect, right? If you go back to who Semmelweis was, back to the medical metaphor, right?
Yeah.
He was back then. You had this
The
idea
germ
of
guy.
miasma,
Wash your
thinking
hands.
of illness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
he was the one that said, "Oh, we got to wash our hands, and if we do that, we're not going to spread these things that seem to cause people to get sick."
Yeah.
Which later was known as germs.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're calling out. That what we're declaring is what is agile coaching today is akin to the miasma theory back then.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to do is re-scrutinize, re-examine our beliefs, be more empirical, and redefine what this puppy is. Because somehow patients are still dying from illness, y'all.
Well,
It's so funny because my understanding is that people's reaction to Semmelweis is not that they just started washing their hands. There was a bit of a discussion around that that lasted way longer than you would think it to. And the analogy of the moth to the flame is super interesting because my understanding of that moths, they navigate by the moonlight. So that's why they keep the light on one side of them. It's useful for them in a certain context. If they come across an actual flame, that same mechanism causes them to go straight into the flame and then they die.
So here's the thing. What happened with Semmelweis? He was chastised. He was tossed from his position. Okay. The man was just ostracized. Okay.
Yeah, he was right, but it wasn't pleasant for him at all.
But the whole point was it eventually did draw enough attention where folks were saying, well, now that I think about it, and that's part of what I'm looking for that little spark of, well, now that I think about it, maybe there's something there. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if we can get enough folks to say, maybe there's something there, we don't all have to think about this as a many-to-many problem. We have a many-to-many people, okay, having at this conversation because no brain should go it alone.
There it is. I see my opportunity to wrap it up. Hopefully this conversation doesn't take 50 years. I do too. Here's this Agile thing is committed to having these conversations in public. Mike, I think I'm speaking for you on this.
Absolutely. But, we are committed to doing that. And all you folks out there listening, like and subscribe so that you can tell when we're having more of these.
Totally. I think that's about all the time we have today. Thanks for listening. I've been Matt Beam.
I've been Mike Marchi.
I've been Marcelo Lopez all along.
I've been winning.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And we'll pick this up next time.
See you around the electron stream.
Nice.